Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, this is a summary video about our first EV road trip that we took a couple of months ago. There are 8 other videos on this channel about that road trip, which is basically 5,200 miles across the southwest of the US. A year ago, we did this trip in our gasoline SUV, a Land Rover, and while that was a fantastic road tripping car, I was very interested to see how different the experience would be in an EV. Would it be cheaper? If so, would it be significantly cheaper, or is the cost of public charging so high, there aren't really any sort of cost savings doing it in an EV? Would I have to spend a lot of time waiting for a charger? Would I come across broken chargers and be, stranded, unable to charge? Would we find lots of chargers blocked by ICE vehicles, like pickup truck bros, that kind of thing? And on this trip, I was able to compare, the experience directly with doing it in a gas car. And the results were pretty interesting. We'll start with charging at Tesla superchargers, or public charging. We had 36 separate charging sessions across 32 different supercharging sites, which were spread over 11 states. 21 of those sites were the older version 2 Tesla superchargers, which have a maximum power delivery of 150 kilowatts. And if you plug in next to another car, you're going to end up sharing that 150 kilowatt max. 11 of the sites were the newer V3s with 250 kilowatt charge rates, which is great because that's what our car can handle, and you don't end up sharing power even if you park right next to someone. At no point did we end up having to wait for a charging stall. We came close once in Flagstaff, Arizona. We actually took the last stall, and the next guy that drove in a few minutes later, he actually had to wait, I think, about 3 or 4 minutes for one of the other cars to leave before he could charge. But it never happened to us. In terms of ICE chargers, this is where gasoline cars park in the Tesla supercharger spot. Didn't happen. We never saw a gasoline car parked in the Tesla superchargers. At no point did we ever come across a non-working Tesla supercharger. That's not to say that there weren't any broken chargers, just the one that we happened to plug into always worked. As for the other chargers, they always had their lights on, although I'm not sure if that's significant. But we also never saw any of the cords draped over the top of the unit, which is what people do to signify that a charger is down. Then we look at sort of failed or interrupted charging sessions. Again, watching YouTube videos, a lot of people will start charging, and within seconds or a couple of minutes, the car stops charging with some sort of error. Or worse still, it looks like it's charging fine. You leave to go to the restroom or get some food, and while you're away from the car, you get a notification on your phone that charging has stopped. That didn't happen to us at all. We'd plug the car in and it would keep on charging until we went and unplugged it. We never had an interrupted session. All in all, we spent just shy of $500 on charging at these superchargers across the sort of 5,200 miles of the trip. The next type of charging is charging at hotels, or destination charging, or level 2 charging. We had 14 nights on this trip in hotels across 7 different hotels, all of which advertised that they had EV charging. The number of chargers at hotels is normally pretty low. The smallest installation we saw was 2 chargers, which is typically a Tesla charger and a non-Tesla charger. The largest installation we came across was 12 chargers. This was 6 Tesla chargers, 6 non-Tesla chargers. This was at a Hilton in Montebello, Los Angeles. Very impressed with that installation. But the typical installation would be 2, maybe 4 chargers if you're lucky. Now, out of 14 nights, on 8 of those nights, a charger was available for us to use. But on 6 of those nights, the chargers were either already in use when we got there by another EV, because typically we would arrive quite late at the hotel, or they were iced. In other words, there was a gasoline car parked right in front of the charger blocking it. This was unfortunately common in hotels where the chargers are positioned anywhere near the front door. People are generally lazy. They want to park as close to the front door as possible. And if the chargers are positioned there, then regardless of the signage, people will just park in them. We had much better luck getting a charger at hotels where the chargers were as far away from the front door as possible. We noticed Hilton do a pretty good job of this. They often put them around the back of the hotel. I've also heard reports from people who have arrived at a hotel intending to depend on the charger to find that it's not working. Again, on those 8 nights when we were able to use the hotel chargers, we didn't come across any that didn't work. And again, much like the public course superchargers, we didn't come across any interrupted charging sessions. So we'd plug the car in, we'd go to bed, the car would charge and, would charge up to 100% and stop at, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever it may be. At no point did we get a charging error. So all in all, it was a pretty good experience when the chargers were available, but there's definitely a lot more work that needs to be done by the hotels here to ensure that they're not blocked by gasoline cars and that there are enough of them available. 2 chargers may have been okay 5 years ago. It's not okay now. You need at least a dozen chargers at a hotel, I would say. When it comes to taking a road trip, and I mean a long road trip, in an EV versus a gas car, a lot of people are concerned about how long this public charging takes. Even if you tell someone, the car can go from 10% to 80% in 20 minutes, people would still think that that's a long time sitting there waiting for the charger. Because we took this same trip last year in our SUV, which is a gas Land Rover Discovery, I was able to compare exactly how long that a leg on that trip took. So between Albuquerque and Las Vegas, the Land Rover, I should point out, actually logs your trips. So it actually has a GPS track of where you drove, how fast you drove, your fuel consumption, and so on. So I could compare exactly Albuquerque to Las Vegas. There's a slight difference in that we stayed at a different hotel in Albuquerque and we stayed at a different hotel on the Las Vegas Strip, but the difference was about 3 miles. We did 579 miles on this leg in the Land Rover and it was 582 in the Tesla. So this is a breakdown of how long we spent driving versus charging, stopping for the restroom, putting gas in the car, having lunch. And then I sort of break that down. And what we found is that the total trip, door to door, was 10 hours and 52 minutes in the Tesla and 10 hours and 48 minutes in the Land Rover. So technically, the gas car was 4 minutes quicker. But of course, it went 3 miles less. So on balance, I'd say that, technically they took exactly the same amount of time, at least on the face of it. How is that possible? Well, if we look at the driving time, the actual time spent driving, it was 9 hours and 8 minutes in the Tesla, but 9 hours and 18 minutes in the Land Rover. So this suggests that, we had a 10-minute delay in the Land Rover due to traffic, trucks pulling out in front of us and passing each other uphill, construction zones, who knows? But the reason that both cars took the same amount of time is that the gas car actually had 10 minutes worse traffic, I would say. And if you look at the stops for eating, we spent 54 minutes in the Tesla eating, as it were, and an extra 21 minutes in the Land Rover. I guess either our food took longer to arrive or we ate slower. Who knows? So in reality, the time difference between the 2 cars, if you allow for the 3 mile difference, was basically nothing. They took exactly the same amount of time. The charging stops, I guess were offset by traffic or how long it took the waitress to bring us our breakfast. If we kind of remove that stuff, though, if we sort of say, well, let's pretend that the traffic was the same for both cars, and let's say that you spent the same amount of time eating on both cars. So the driving time would be 9 hours and 8 minutes for both cars, and the eating time was, 55 minutes, whatever, for both cars. Basically, a 600-mile leg is going to take 30 minutes longer in a Tesla. Roughly 10 hours and 15 minutes in the gas car, 10 hours 45 minutes in the Tesla. So 30 minutes added isn't as bad as you might expect, given, how long it takes a car to charge. And that's mainly because you charge the car while you're having lunch. You charge the car while you're, going to the restroom or getting a coffee, whatever. Always make sure that you do your charging at the same time as you're doing something else. That way, any sort of delay is absolutely minimal. So in return for taking an extra 30 minutes every, 600 miles or so, what are we saving money, if anything, given that obviously we're charging at public chargers, which are more expensive than charging at home? So we covered 5,185 miles, and it cost us $497.40 in public charging. If those hotel chargers had been available every night, as opposed to just 8 of the 14 nights, we would have saved a bit more because we could have charged up at the hotel overnight. We therefore wouldn't have had to go to the charger in the morning to top the car up. If that had been the case, then we would have spent only $382 in public charging. So the most relevant comparison for us is our previous car, which is the one that was replaced by the Tesla. So the previous car was a Land Rover Discovery 5. It's a 3-litre gasoline V6 with a supercharger. According to the logging from last year's road trip, we averaged 21.24 miles per gallon in the Land Rover across the whole trip, and it required premium fuel. I gave a breakdown of the miles by state, and then I basically calculated the cost of premium fuel in each state based on the advertised prices in the video as we're driving past gasoline stations to give me a rough idea. So all in, it would have cost just over $1,200 in the Land Rover versus the Tesla. So that's, over $700 more for the same trip. And again, if we're comparing it to a Tesla, which was able to charge every night at a hotel, then it would have been, over $820 more expensive. Now, the Land Rover Discovery 5 is not the most common car on the road, so probably not the most relatable. If we look at the Toyota RAV4, which is the most popular crossover on the road, assuming you could get 35 miles per gallon out of it, which given a lot of this was at 85 miles an hour, I'm not entirely convinced. Let's say that you did. Now the Toyota only needs regular fuel. So again, with the same breakdown, we can calculate what it would have cost, which is just under $700. Nearly $200 more expensive than the Tesla, but not too bad, really. And again, if the Tesla could charge at the hotel every night, then it would have been just over $300 more. So for the data nerds like myself, this is a full breakdown of the trip. Every leg that we drove, how long it took, how much it cost, and then once we'd gotten to our destination, whether it's Albuquerque or Las Vegas, how much driving we did at that destination, and how much money we spent charging at that destination. I've also broken down the chargers. The ones that are in yellow are the 150 kilowatt V2. The ones in the cyan are 250 kilowatt V3. So I'm going to finish up with some tips that I learnt from this first road trip. And the first would be plan your restroom and food breaks to be at the chargers and make sure you check what facilities are available at those charging sites. If you decide to stop to have lunch and it takes you, let's say, 45 minutes, then you get back in the car and then you realize 30 minutes later that you need to stop to charge, you're then going to have to spend, 30 or 45 minutes charging while sitting in the car. That's just a bad use of your time. Also, be aware that some charging stations don't have any kind of facilities at all to speak of. There may be nowhere to get food. There may be nowhere to get a drink. Restrooms are typically not a problem. The most remote superchargers that I've come across were at places like a Comfort Inn. And it'll be in the middle of nowhere with a Comfort Inn, but of course you can go into the Comfort Inn and use their restroom. Unless they have a sign on the door to say you can't. I did see that once. I'd suggest that you carry with you something to clean the windshield, because unlike when you stop at a gas station, charging facilities, they don't give you equipment, to clean your windshield. Despite any perceptions you may have about cars being, slow to charge, at least versus filling with gasoline, at lunchtime, you're going to struggle to finish your food and get back to the car before the charging is completed. Certainly, the car will have enough charge in it to carry on to the next leg within maybe, 15, 20 minutes. There's no way that you're going to go to a restaurant, order food, eat it, pay, and get back to the car in, 15, 20 minutes. So you'll have to set the charging limit higher. For us, we noticed our lunch stops were often 45, maybe even 50 minutes. And that's if we rush and get the check while we're still eating. And even then, we only got back to the car with, 95% charge. So, and the reason this is important is if your car finishes charging and you leave it plugged in, you're going to get what's called overage charges, which means after a 5-minute grace period, they're going to start charging you $1 a minute for leaving your car plugged in and blocking the charger. And rightly so. Another important question is range anxiety. A lot of journalists, whether they're writing for major newspapers or TV shows, they always seem to be in a situation where will they make it? They're close to running out. They have to slow down. They're getting stressed. Is that really a thing, or is that just done for clicks? For us, it's not a thing, at least not in the Tesla. Tesla has an energy chart on one of the screens, which is very useful to bring up as you're driving along. And this basically predicts how much charge will be in your battery when you get to your destination. So in the screen on the right, you can see there that the car is predicting that we will arrive with 14% charge. And that line is showing how the charge is going down as we're driving to our destination. So the left-hand side is our departure. The right-hand side is, 160, 170 miles later. And the icon in the middle 71% is, at the moment I took this picture, this is what the charge in the car was. On this screen, you see that green or green and yellow line is below a grey line. Well, the grey line was the prediction, and the coloured line, the green and yellow, is what's actually happening. And you can see that it's starting to drop below the prediction. We're going to get there with less charge than the car thought. And that's because the wind had picked up, and it was specifically a headwind. So you're fighting through the wind. I started monitoring this screen in that situation, and what I did was, if the charge, the predicted charge at destination went below 10%, I would slow down by 5 miles an hour. If it still was, after another 10 minutes, it was still going down, I'd slow down another 5 miles an hour. Whereas once it started going back up towards 15%, I'd speed up by 5 miles an hour. And I did this to try and ensure that I arrive at a charger with 10 to 15% charge. Another top tip I would say is to try and arrive at the superchargers with no more than 10 to 15% charge. And when you are charging, leave with enough to reach the next charger with that same 10-15% buffer. The reason for this is that the car charges faster the lower the state of charge when you plug it in. So, for example, if you plug it in with 15%, you might get 250 kilowatts of charging speed. If you plug it in at 40%, you might only get 140 kilowatts of charging speed. So you're going to spend less time at the chargers if you go from, say, 10 to 60% than if you go from 30 to 80%. So many hotels these days have EV chargers that I would suggest that you book hotels with EV charging and charge the car up fully overnight. It does save some money, typically about $20 at the time that I'm writing this. But more importantly, it saves time. If you have a fully charged car in the morning, you can just, have breakfast at the hotel, which may be included in your room rate. Get in the car, hit the road and do, 3 hours worth of driving. If you need to charge the car in the morning, you're going to have to not have breakfast at the hotel. Drive to somewhere to have breakfast that's near the charger. Charge the car up while you're eating breakfast, and then hit the road. So it's much more convenient to actually charge the car up at the hotel overnight. With that said, don't depend on the hotel charger actually being available when you want it to be. You need to have a backup plan. If you arrive at a hotel with 10-15% charge, and there's another EV there already plugged in, and they're probably going to be plugged in all night, you're going to be out of luck. What are you going to do in the morning when you get in the car? Is there a Tesla supercharger nearby for you to charge? Otherwise, you've got real problems. So I suggest to book hotels with an EV charger that are fairly close to a Tesla supercharger, in order that when you get to that hotel in the morning, you've still got enough energy in the battery to get to the supercharger if you need to. But all in, taking a road trip in an EV, at least in a Tesla, isn't really that much different to taking a road trip in a gas car. It's certainly not really any less convenient. It doesn't really take any longer, and it definitely costs a lot less money. So all in, I'd say it's a pretty great experience.